Have you ever wondered what would happen if the past, the one you tried so hard to bury, suddenly knocked on your door, bringing not just ghosts, but also a daughter you never knew existed? Brace your heart, because this is the story of Ethan, a man who had everything, except the only thing that truly mattered. Ethan, a widower drowning in the solitude of his imposing mansion in Scottsdale, Arizona, opened his door to a hungry woman asking to clean his house in exchange for a plate of food. But as his gaze met the eyes of the little girl she carried in her arms, Ethan's world stopped. In that instant, his empire of solitude crumbled. His heart recognized a secret the past refused to bury. The morning sun streamed through the glass walls of Ethan's mansion, flooding the living room with a stark, white light. For most, it would be a beautiful day. For Ethan, it was just another day of clarity exposing the emptiness of his life. Each sunbeam seemed like a spotlight on the invisible dust dancing in the air, on the absence of laughter, on the monumental silence of the house. Today, the silence was even heavier. It had been exactly 3 years since his wife, Eleanor, had passed away. He stood in front of a large digital photo frame on the marble fireplace. Images of Eleanor cycled silently. Eleanor smiling on a boat in the Caribbean. Eleanor cutting the ribbon at the inauguration of a new hospital wing they funded. Eleanor on their wedding day, eyes shining. She had been a good woman, a brilliant business partner, the architect of much of his social life. He missed her, a neat, respectful absence. But if he was honest with himself, the pain he felt was that of a man who lost an accomplice, not a soulmate. Because his soul had been left behind, in a small, dusty town, 9 years ago. The strong sun outside didn't remind him of the Caribbean with Eleanor. It reminded him of another sun, warmer, more brutal. The sun that scorched the dirt roads of his hometown, and that sun reminded him of Sophia. He closed his eyes, and memory, his most faithful enemy, assaulted him. He saw himself at 25, a slender young man with calloused hands and dreams bigger than his wallet. And he saw Sophia at 19, with her long black hair, tanned skin, a smile that seemed to hold all the light in the world. They sat by a river, sharing a bottle of soda, planning a life they would never have. Their love was the only valuable thing they possessed. It was a desperate love, forged in poverty, a small boat in an ocean of difficulties. Then, the opportunity came. A scholarship to a prestigious university in New York City, an internship program at a tech company that promised the impossible. It was his only chance to escape the life of manual labor that awaited him, the same life his father had led. The farewell was the hardest thing he had ever done. "I'll be back, Sophie," he had promised, using the nickname she had given him. It was his middle name, Julian, which only she used. "I swear on everything sacred. I'll study, get a good job, and come back to marry you." "Promises are carried away by the wind, Ethan," she replied, her eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. "The world outside is big. It swallows people like us. It won't swallow me, and I'll never forget you." He kissed her one last time, the taste of her kiss mixed with the salt of his tears. He boarded the bus and looked back, imprinting her image, standing in the dust of the station, waving goodbye until she became a dot on the horizon. The world did, in fact, swallow him. New York City, with its speed, its ambition, its promise of power, was a whirlwind. He worked, studied, slept little, and met Eleanor at university. She was the daughter of an industrialist, intelligent, sophisticated, and saw in him the same hunger that drove her. They became partners in business and in life. The promise he had made to Sophia gradually became a distant memory, a dream of another life, covered by the reality of contracts, spreadsheets, and the cold gleam of success. He told himself that Sophia deserved better, someone who wouldn't make her wait. He told himself that she would have already forgotten him, and with that lie, he built his empire and his new life upon the grave of his first and only true love. The sound of the doorbell startled him from his memories, a sharp, insistent sound that broke the sanctity of his morning. His housekeeper, Mrs. Jenkins, a stern woman who had been loyal to Eleanor and now managed the house with military efficiency, was not there. It was her day off. Irritated by the intrusion, Ethan crossed the foyer. Whoever it was would be dismissed with coldness. He opened the door impatiently. The midday sun blinded him for an instant. When his eyes adjusted, he saw the scene that would define the rest of his life. Standing at his door, under the strong sun, was a woman. She seemed to have stepped out of one of his most painful memories. She was thin, her shoulders hunched with exhaustion, her face marked by deep fatigue. She held the hand of a little girl, perhaps 8 years old, with dark hair and frightened eyes, hiding behind her mother's legs. Both wore simple clothes, clean but visibly worn. The woman raised her face, and Ethan's heart stopped. Even with the lines of worry, with the weathered skin, with the vanished glow of youth, he recognized her. It was like being struck by lightning. Sophia. She, however, did not recognize him. The man she knew was a slender young man with rough hands and wind-swept hair. The man in front of her was a fortress, older, stronger, with precisely cut hair, a shaved face, wearing clothes that cost more than she earned in a year. To her, he was just a rich stranger, the owner of that house that seemed an unattainable palace. Moved by the desperation that had led her there, she spoke, her voice low and trembling, but charged with the strength of a lioness fighting for her cub. "Sir, good morning. Forgive my audacity in knocking on your door. My name is Sophia. My daughter and I are going through a very difficult time. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for an opportunity, a job, anything." She looked at the impeccable facade of the house, the perfectly manicured gardens. "I saw the size of your house. I thought perhaps you might need someone to help with cleaning. I am very hard-working. I can wash, iron, cook, tend the garden, whatever is needed. I don't need a salary, sir, just a plate of food for the two of us, and a safe place for her to sleep tonight." Ethan was physically unable to respond. Her words were a distorted echo of their old dreams, in our home, with our life. And there she was, asking to clean his house for food. Guilt was a poison rising in his throat, suffocating him. 12 years of success, of wealth, of power. Everything crumbled in that instant, revealing the man he truly was. A deserter, a liar, the architect of the misery of the only woman he had ever loved. "Ethan," Sophia managed to whisper. Her voice was a broken sound, unrecognizable even to herself, hearing his name spoken with a familiarity that didn't belong to this man, this house, this life. Sophia finally looked at him intently. She scrutinized his face, his eyes, and beneath the millionaire's mask, she began to see the features of the young man who haunted her nights. The shape of his eyes, the way his mouth curved, even in pain. Her jaw dropped. The air escaped her lungs in a gasp of astonishment and horror. Her eyes filled with an old pain, a betrayal that time had not healed. "No, it can't be," she stammered, stepping back, pulling her daughter with her. But it was the little girl who sealed their fate. Frightened by the tension between the adults, The child looked up and met Ethan's gaze, and he saw his own eyes, the same color, the same shape, the same intensity. It was like looking into a mirror of time. He looked at the girl, an 8-year-old girl. He had left 9 years ago. The math was simple, brutal, and undeniable. The girl at his door, hungry, frightened, was not just the daughter of the woman he had abandoned. She is his daughter. Ethan's world shattered into a million pieces. The pain of Eleanor's death, the guilt of abandoning Sophia, the shock of discovering a daughter. Everything converged into a single point of unbearable agony. There, at the door of his empty mansion, under the strong sun, he was not Ethan, the tech titan. He was just Julian, the poor young man who had made a promise and broken it in the most devastating way possible. And the past he had tried to bury under a mountain of money had come to collect its debt. And the debt had his eyes. Julian, whispered with the voice of a ghost, broke the spell that had paralyzed Ethan. That nickname, a relic of a life he had tried to bury under 12 years of success and concrete, brought him back to the brutal reality of his doorstep. In front of him, Sophia trembled, her face pale with shock, ancient hatred, and the pain of betrayal battling in her eyes. She had recognized him, and the recognition brought not joy, but an even deeper horror. I didn't know it was you," she stammered, taking a step back, the instinct to flee stronger than the desperation that had led her there. She clutched her daughter, Lily, to her chest, as if to protect her from him. From this man who was the personification of all his broken promises. "Forget what I said. It was a mistake. Let's go, darling." She turned, ready to plunge back into the street, to face hunger and uncertainty. Anything to avoid accepting pity from the man who had destroyed her life. The humiliation of begging for food from a stranger was nothing compared to the humiliation of begging it from him. "No!" Ethan's voice rang out, a command born of the pure panic of losing her, again. He stepped forward, and without thinking, grabbed her arm. The touch was electric, a current of 12 years of unresolved history passing between them. "Please, don't go. Come in. It's too sunny. The child needs water, a place to rest." The words came out clumsy, stupid. He, a master negotiator, a man who could move markets with a single phrase, now couldn't formulate a coherent thought. His mind was chaos. Sophia there, and the girl with his eyes, his daughter. The word resonated in his mind like a cathedral bell, deafening. "Daughter. I don't want your help, Ethan," Sophia spat, trying to pull away. The strength in her voice was the force of a decade of contained anger. "I didn't need you for 9 years. I don't need you now. I'd rather beg on the street than accept anything from you." Those words were like knives, each one digging deeper into his guilt. But it was the child who broke her resistance. Lily, awakened by the tension, began to cry. A weak, tired cry. The cry of a sick and hungry child. "Mommy, my tummy hurts," she murmured, her little face hot against Sophia's neck. In that instant, the battle within Sophia ended. Her pride, her anger, her pain, everything bowed before her daughter's primary need. She looked at Lily's tear-streaked face, and then at the man in front of her. And in her eyes, he saw defeat, the surrender of a mother who would do anything for her, cub, even accept help from her greatest ghost. Without another word, Ethan guided her inside. As he closed the heavy door, he felt as if he were closing a portal to the past, trapping it there with him. The silence of the mansion seemed even more oppressive with their presence. Sophia and Lily's entry into that place was a collision of worlds. They walked through the foyer, Sophia's feet leaving dust marks on the impeccable marble. Lily, who had stopped crying, now looked at everything with wide eyes, her mouth slightly open. She had never seen such a high ceiling, a floor that shone, a space so vast and empty. It was like entering a museum or a church. "Please sit," Ethan said, gesturing to a white leather sofa that probably cost more than all the houses Sophia had rented in her life. He felt like a stranger in his own home, a clumsy host for the ghosts he had just invited. He rushed to the kitchen, a stainless steel and technology environment he barely used, and returned with a glass of water and one of milk. He handed the milk to Sophia. "For her," he said, his voice still unsteady. Sophia took the glass, her hands trembling. She helped Lily drink, and the child drank the milk with an eagerness that broke Ethan's heart into 1,000 pieces. While the child drank, Sophia looked around. She saw the expensive paintings on the walls, the sculptures, the designer furniture. Every object was a testament to his success, to the life he had built without her. Every luxury item was a brick in the wall he had built between the past and the present, a wall that had now collapsed. She felt small, dirty, an intruder in that sanctuary of wealth. It was at that moment that a new figure entered the scene. Arthur, the butler and head of security, had returned early from his day off. He entered the living room and froze at the sight. His face, normally a mask of impassive professionalism, contorted into an expression of shock and disapproval. "Sir," he said, his voice cold, his eyes moving from Ethan to Sophia and the child, as if analyzing a threat. "Are you all right? Who are these people?" The word people was said with a contained contempt that made Sophia shrink. For Arthur, a man whose life was dedicated to protecting Ethan from any complications, from any vestige of his undesirable past, the presence of these two was a fire alarm. He saw a con artist, a woman from the past who had appeared to exploit his employer's wealth and solitude. "It's all right, Arthur. They are my guests," Ethan replied. The word guests sounded strange, even in his own mouth. "Please prepare a guest room, the best we have, and ask the kitchen to prepare a light chicken broth soup and some fruit. Quickly." Arthur stared at him, disapproval clear in his gaze. "As you wish, sir," he said, with a stiff bow before withdrawing. But the message was clear. He was the guardian of the castle and would not easily accept these intruders. His presence added a new layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. With Lily's most immediate needs attended to, silence settled between them again, heavy and full of unasked questions. Lily, exhausted, fell asleep again in Sophia's lap. Ethan watched her, his heart a mixture of pain and terrifying fascination. His daughter was there, feet away from him, and he was a complete stranger to her. "We need to talk," he finally said. He led her to the library, the same place where hours earlier he had contemplated his solitude. He let her sit in a soft armchair while he remained standing, pacing like a caged animal. He didn't know where to start. "I'm sorry," seemed like a joke. "What happened? Was too cruel. How did you find me?" he asked, the first question that came to mind. "I didn't find you. I wasn't looking for you," she replied, her voice still filled with cold anger. "I was just looking for a roof, a place to spend the night. My daughter is sick. We were evicted from our tiny room yesterday. The landlord needed the place. I walked all day. I knocked on dozens of doors. No one gave me a chance. And then I saw this house and thought, whoever lives here has so much that they won't miss a little food." She let out a bitter laugh. "What an irony, isn't it? Of all the doors in the world, I came to knock on yours." Her story was a succession of blows for Ethan. evicted, hungry, her daughter sick. Every word was an accusation, a reminder of his monumental failure. "Sophia, he began. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "You didn't know?" She interrupted him, her eyes flashing. "Of course you didn't know. How could you know from the top of your castle? You disappeared, Julian. You promised you'd come back." "I waited. I wrote you dozens of letters that came back with an unknown address stamp. I looked for you. And you? You just disappeared. You built your empire and left me behind, like I was a piece of trash from your old life." The torrent of 12 years of pain and resentment came to light. I was young, foolish. I believed in you. And when I needed you most, when I discovered... She stopped, swallowing, instinctively looking towards the door, as if to make sure Lily was still asleep. It was the moment. The question that floated between them. The truth he already felt in his bones. "When did you discover what, Sophia?" he asked, his voice a whisper. "The girl, Lily. She is..." He couldn't finish. The question was too big, too heavy. Sophia looked at him intently, and in her eyes was all the contempt in the world. "Yes, Ethan," she said, her voice hard as diamond. "She is your daughter. The daughter you never knew existed because you were too busy becoming the king of the world. I found out I was pregnant a month after you left. I tried to tell you in every way, but you had already discarded me. My family turned their backs on me. They called me a disgrace, and I raised her alone, every day, every night, cleaning other people's floors, washing dishes, doing whatever it took so she would never go hungry, so she would have the minimum dignity, the dignity her father denied her." The verbal confirmation was the final blow. Ethan leaned on the table, his legs trembling. His daughter, an 8-year-old daughter, a whole life he had missed. The first step, the first tooth, the first word, birthdays, night fears, fevers. He hadn't been there for any of it. He had been an absent father, a ghost who didn't even know of his own existence. He looked at Sophia, at the face of a woman who should have shared a life of joy with him, but who instead had carried the weight of both alone. Her strength, her resilience, the unbreakable love that kept her standing, all of it crushed him. He wasn't even worthy of being in the same room as her. Ethan tried to speak, but there were no words. What could he say? Apologies were insults. Justifications were lies. Only the naked, raw truth of his failure remained. The status quo of that house had been permanently broken. There, under the same roof, were 3 people united by blood and separated by an abyss of pain and time. Ethan, the father who had just discovered his daughter. Sophia, the mother who would never forgive him. Lily, the innocent child sleeping in a luxury room, oblivious to the fact that the rich stranger who had taken her in was the father she never knew. Ethan walked to the guest room door, opened it silently. The hallway light illuminated the scene. Lily slept, a small figure lost in a huge bed of silk sheets. She looked like a fairy tale princess, but he knew her life had been a nightmare, and he was the monster in the story. The question that echoed in his soul as he watched the daughter he didn't know was no longer, "What happened?" It was a much more terrifying, "What do I do now?" He could give her a castle, but he didn't know how to give her a home. He could give her the world, but he didn't know how to be her father. Ethan's journey was just beginning, and the road ahead was a minefield of guilt, resentment, and the fragile, almost impossible, hope of redemption. The mansion, once a sanctuary of silence, transformed into a battlefield of unspoken emotions. The air was thick with the weight of 12 years of history, of resentment, and of a guilt so palpable it seemed to have a physical presence in the rooms. They lived under the same roof, but on different planets, orbiting the same small, frightened star. Lily. For Lily, the change was a confusing fairy tale. She woke up in a bed that felt like a cloud, in a room bigger than all the houses she had ever lived in. There were toys she only saw in shop windows, a garden that looked like an enchanted forest, and a refrigerator that, magically, was always full. She didn't understand the tension between her mother and the kind-eyed, sad man who owned the house, but she smelled warm food and felt the touch of clean sheets. And for an 8-year-old, that was paradise. For Sophia, the mansion was a golden cage. Every luxury object, every work of art, was a reminder of the life Ethan had built without her, of the abyss that separated them. She had agreed to stay, but only for her daughter. Her pride was armor, and she moved through the house with a defensive dignity, rejecting anything that wasn't strictly necessary. She ate the food offered, but spent her days in the guest room with Lily, creating a small territory of normalcy amidst the suffocating opulence. Her gratitude for Lily's safety waged a constant battle against the deep resentment she felt for the man who had caused her so much pain. For Ethan, their presence was both torture and a blessing. With every laugh from Lily that echoed through the halls, his heart broke a little more with the awareness of the years he had lost. He tried to approach awkwardly. He bought the most expensive toys, the prettiest clothes, but he didn't know how to break through the wall of silence and fear that separated him from the child. Lily was shy with him, sensing the hesitation and pain in his gaze. He was Uncle Julian, the good man who had taken them in, but the word Dad was a universe away. His interaction with Sophia was even more complex. Conversations were short, functional, always revolving around Lily's needs. "She needs cough medicine," she would say. "The new school uniform you bought is a bit big," she would point out. And he, desperate to repair the irreparable, tried to fix everything with money. "I'll hire the best doctors for Lily, a pediatrician, a nutritionist," he would say. "Can I enroll you in a course, Sophia? Whatever you want to do, a university." "I don't want your charity, Ethan," she would cut him off, her voice cold. "I'm here for my daughter. As soon as I get a job and a place to stay, we're leaving." The threat of losing them again was a constant panic for Ethan. He knew he couldn't keep them there by force or by money. He needed time, and he desperately needed to understand the depth of the abyss into which they had fallen. How had Sophia, such an intelligent and strong woman, reached that point of total desperation? Moved by that need, he did what he always did when he needed answers. He hired the best. He contacted a discreet and highly reputable investigation agency. The mission was delicate: retrace Sophia's steps in recent years. No surveillance, no invasion of privacy, just a collection of public records, interviews with former neighbors, ex-colleagues. He needed the map of her journey of pain. While the investigation proceeded in secret, the conflict within the house gained a new and formidable combatant: Arthur. The butler, who had loyally served Ethan's late wife, Eleanor, saw the arrival of Sophia and Lily not as a reunion, but as a desecration. He was the guardian of Eleanor's memory, of the order and stability of that house. And Sophia was chaos, a relic of a poor and complicated past that, in his opinion, should have remained buried. His hostility was subtle, but cutting. He referred to Sophia as the lady, with an intonation that made her feel like an imposter. He accidentally left photo frames of Ethan and Eleanor in prominent places where Sophia often passed, and his conversations with Ethan were full of venomous insinuations. Mrs. Eleanor had impeccable taste for the living room flowers, didn't she, sir? He would say when Sophia was nearby. She would never allow yellow tulips. She said they were common. The message was clear. You don't belong here. One night, Arthur confronted Ethan directly in his office. Sir, with all due respect, I need to express my concern. Arthur began, his voice a mix of submission and steel. The presence of these people is disrupting the routine and peace of this house. Mrs. Eleanor, God rest her soul, built this home with such care. Are you sure you're not being deceived? A woman from the past conveniently appearing now that you are widowed and vulnerable. It seems like a very well-rehearsed story. Enough, Arthur! Ethan exploded, anger dominating him. Sophia is not a con artist, and the child is my daughter. They are staying, and you will treat them with the utmost respect. Is that clear? Arthur recoiled, shocked by the revelation and by his employer's fury. As you wish, sir, he said with a bow. But Ethan saw in his eyes that the butler's loyalty was not to him, but to the old order, to Eleanor's memory. Arthur would not be an ally. He would be an obstacle, a spy within his own walls, waiting for a slip. The investigation began to yield its first results. They were fragments of a life of struggle. The report detailed Sophia's jobs: waitress in a bankrupt restaurant, cleaner in a hotel from which she was fired for Lily's illness that made her miss 3 days, seamstress in a small local garment factory. It detailed addresses, a succession of rented rooms in boarding houses, each poorer than the last, and it detailed the loneliness. No close friends, no family for support. She was an island, fighting alone to keep herself and her daughter afloat. Every page of the report was a new stab in Ethan's heart. He read about her difficulties and remembered the luxury dinners, the first-class trips, the money he spent on frivolities. The dissonance between the two lives was so brutal that it caused him physical nausea. Then came the final report, the one that explained the total collapse that had brought her to his door. The investigator, a discreet man named Miller, sat across from Ethan in the library. Mr. Ethan, what we discovered is disturbing, he said, opening a folder. Ms. Sophia's final debacle began 6 months ago. She had gotten what seemed to be the best job of her life, a position as a seamstress in a small but respected uniform factory called Phoenix Textiles. The salary was decent. She was on payroll. For the first time in years, she had stability. Ethan felt a glimmer of relief. At least she had had a moment of peace. But 4 months ago, Miller continued, Phoenix Textiles was bought, an acquisition made by a larger conglomerate, Imperial Fabrics, and as always happens, the new management came with a cost optimization policy. Ethan's heart began to chill. He knew that language. Imperial Fabrics initiated a mass layoff process. The list included all employees, with less than a year at the company, to avoid higher severance costs. Ms. Sophia was on that list. She lost her job. Without the salary, she couldn't pay the 2 months of rent she owed, and the landlord, an inflexible man, evicted her. That's what put her on the street, with nowhere to go. The story was tragic, another example of the brutality of the corporate world. But there was still a missing piece, the twist in the plot, the deep truth that would transform the tragedy into a personal nightmare for Ethan. And who owns that conglomerate, Imperial Fabrics? Ethan asked, although a part of him, a dark and terrified place in his soul, already knew the answer. Miller hesitated. He opened the last page of the report and pushed it across the table. It was a corporate organizational chart. At the top, a holding company called Fortune Group Investments. Below it, several subsidiaries, including Imperial Fabrics. And above Fortune Group, at the absolute top of the food chain, was a single name, a single logo. Tech Future Inc., Ethan's company. He stared at the paper. His own name. At the top of that power structure that at its base had crushed the woman he loved. The air left his lungs. The room began to spin. It hadn't been fate. It hadn't been chance. It had been him. He hadn't just abandoned her 12 years ago. He had continued to abandon her every day without knowing it. His incessant pursuit of growth, of acquisitions, of ever greater profits. The decision he probably approved in a 5-minute meeting about restructuring non-essential assets had been the final blow in Sophia's life. He was not just the ghost of her past. He was the architect of her present ruin. Ethan staggered to the window and looked at the impeccable garden, where at that exact moment, Lily was chasing butterflies, laughing, a sound he was beginning to love. A child laughing in a garden, bought with the money that had cost her mother her job and home. The guilt he felt before was a shadow. The one he felt now was a dark ocean, and he was drowning. The revelation was not just a fact, it was a verdict, and he had been judged and condemned by his own history. Now the question was no longer how to repair the past, it was how to survive the present, knowing that he was the monster in the love story of his own life. How do you think Ethan will confront this devastating truth with Sophia? What would be the hardest part of that confession? The truth was both a poison and an antidote. For Ethan, the revelation that his own company had been the weapon that dealt the final blow to Sophia was the bottom of his guilt. He spent the night awake in the library, the investigator's report on the table like a death sentence. He looked at the logo of his company, Tech Future Inc., a symbol of his success and power, and now he could only see the shield of his own unconscious cruelty. He was not just a ghost from Sophia's past, he was the complete architect of her tragedy. The pain was so intense that it transformed into a strange, cold calm. Panic gave way to resolution. There was no longer room for excuses or for clumsy attempts at repair through money. There was only one path forward, the most difficult, the most terrifying. That of total confession. The next morning, the atmosphere in the mansion was even more tense. Sophia kept herself and Lily in a kind of voluntary exile in the guest room, coming out only for meals, which they ate in heavy silence at the enormous dining table. Arthur, the butler, watched them with a hawk's gaze, every gesture a silent criticism. He seemed to have intensified his Cold War campaign, accidentally playing the classical music Miss Eleanor loved so much on the house's sound system. Ethan waited until Lily was in the playroom, a room he had rushed to set up, full of dolls and building blocks with which the child still didn't quite know how to interact, and asked Sophia to sit with him in the library. She came, distrust in every step, her armor of pride firmly in place. "What now, Ethan?" she said. "Another expensive gift you want me to accept to ease your conscience?" He didn't answer immediately. He gestured to the armchair opposite his desk. When she sat, he didn't stay behind the desk, in his position of power. He sat in the armchair next to her, leveling the playing field. He pushed a thin folder onto the coffee table between them. "I asked for an investigation, Sophia," he began, his voice low and grave. "I needed to understand. I needed to know how things got to this point." "Understand what? That life is hard for those who aren't born with a silver spoon like you?" she retorted bitterly. "No," he said, "to understand why you lost your last job at that factory, Phoenix Textiles." Sophia looked at him in surprise. "How do you know that?" "I know everything," he said, his voice filled with infinite weariness. "I know it was a good job, that you had stability for the first time in years, and I know that the factory was bought by a larger conglomerate, and that you and dozens of others were laid off. He paused, gathering all the courage he had left. What I didn't know until yesterday was the name of the owner of that conglomerate. He opened the folder. Inside was a single document, the organizational chart the investigator had shown him. He turned it so she could see it. Sophia leaned in and read the names in the boxes. Imperial Fabrics, Fortune Group, and at the top, dominating everything, the logo of Tech Future Inc. She looked at the logo, then at Ethan's face, and what she saw there was not power or pride, but a shame and pain so profound they were almost a physical confession. The hatred on her face wavered, giving way to an expression of shock and a bitter, ironic understanding. Then she whispered, her voice devoid of anger, only of tired astonishment. It wasn't just fate. It was you again. All along, it was you. I didn't know, Sophia. I swear on my mother's memory that I didn't know, he said, his voice choked. To me, it was just another name in a report, an asset restructuring that a director presented to me in a meeting. I approved it without even thinking. I destroyed your last chance to get back on your feet, and I didn't even know it. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling. For the first time, Sophia saw him completely broken. Not the powerful millionaire, not the ghost of her past, but just a man drowning in his own regret. The sight of him, so vulnerable, disarmed her anger. The resentment that had been her companion for so many years gave way to a strange and uncomfortable feeling, a hint of compassion. She now saw what Arthur and the rest of the world didn't see. His golden cage was as real as her cage of poverty. "Lift your head, Ethan," she said, her voice still cold, but without the venom from before. "Self-pity won't fix anything." The confession didn't solve the problem between them, but it changed the dynamic forever. His brutal honesty, the courage to admit his deepest guilt, had created the first and finest crack in the wall of ice that separated them. From that day on, Ethan changed tactics. He understood that money wasn't the answer. The answer was time, patience, and presence. He stopped offering things and started offering himself. He began to spend hours in the playroom, not trying to interact directly with Lily, which intimidated her, but simply being there. He would sit in a corner and do a puzzle or draw in a notebook, a skill he hadn't used since childhood. At first, Lily ignored him, focused on her dolls, but little by little, childish curiosity won out. She began to peek at what he was doing. One day she approached. "What are you drawing, sir?" the timid little voice asked. "It's a horse," he replied, his heart leaping in his chest. "But I think it looks more like a dog." Lily laughed, a crystal-clear laugh that was the most beautiful sound Ethan had ever heard. "It looks like a crocodile with ears," she said. They laughed together. It was the first time. From that day on, the drawing ritual became sacred. He would draw, and she would give her opinions, correcting his strokes, inventing stories for the animals he created. In those moments, he wasn't the millionaire or the absent father. He was just Julian, the friend who drew crocodiles with ears. And from her armchair in the next room, Sophia watched him, and the ice in her heart melted a little more with each laugh from her daughter. The war with Arthur, however, intensified. The butler, seeing Ethan's closeness to the intruder, became more hostile. One day, Sophia went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water for Lily in the middle of the night. She heard Arthur talking on the phone in the pantry. His voice was low, but full of venom. "I don't know what's wrong with him, Laura. It's that woman, that opportunist. The house isn't the same since she arrived. Mrs. Eleanor's memory is being disrespected. He's blind. Someone needs to open his eyes before it's too late." Sophia felt humiliation burn within her and retreated to the room, her heart heavy. She was an intruder, a threat to the peace of that house, to the memory of the woman who was once his wife. Doubt gnawed at her. Maybe she should leave, disappear, as he had done to her. The turning point occurred days later. Lily had a high fever. Sophia was exhausted, spending the night awake by her daughter's bed. In the morning, Ethan found her in the kitchen trying to prepare tea, her eyes sunken with fatigue. "You need to rest, Sophia. Let me stay with her," he offered. At that moment, Arthur entered. "The doctor for Lily has been contacted, sir. He'll be here in 20 minutes. Then he turned to Sophia, his face a mask of disapproval. If the child had received proper care in the first place, perhaps she wouldn't be sick now. Children need routine and a healthy environment. The insinuation was clear. It was her fault. The fault of her life of poverty and instability. That was the last straw for Ethan. The anger he felt for himself, for Arthur, for the world, exploded. "Shut up, Arthur!" he thundered, his voice echoing through the marble kitchen. Arthur recoiled in shock. He had never seen his employer like this. "You have no right to speak to her like that. You know nothing about the proper care she gave this child alone for 8 years in a world that turned its back on her." He walked up to the butler, his body vibrating with fury. "Let's make something very clear. This is no longer Mrs. Eleanor's house. This is Sophia and my daughter Lily's house. They are my family now. The past is over. The future has begun. And if you cannot accept that, if you cannot treat them with the absolute respect they deserve, the door you came in through is open for your exit." Sophia, watching the scene from the doorway, felt her breath catch. That defense, that declaration. My daughter, my family, now. He was choosing her over the guardian of his past. He was choosing her. Arthur, pale and defeated, simply nodded. "Understood, sir," he murmured, and withdrew. His authority crumbled. That night, after the doctor had come and medicated Lily, the fever finally broke. The child slept peacefully. Ethan entered the room to see her and found Sophia sitting in an armchair by the bed, watching over her daughter's sleep. They remained in silence for a long time, only listening to the child's soft breathing. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, without looking at him. "For what you said to Arthur." "I only spoke the truth," he replied. A new peace, fragile but real, settled between them. An alliance was being forged, not with promises or money, but with acts of defense, of shared care, of vulnerability. Sophia looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, the anger in her eyes gave way to a sad curiosity. "Why, Julian?" she asked. "Why did you never come back?" The question was the key that could open the last door between them. Ethan sat in another armchair, his tired face illuminated by the dim lamplight. The battle for redemption now demanded the most difficult of all confessions, the truth about his own weakness. He took a deep breath, ready to tell the story of how the poor young man she loved got lost in the labyrinth of the rich man he had become. What do you think Sophia's reaction will be to Ethan's full confession? Do you believe she can truly forgive him? The journey to build a family was just beginning. Sophia's question, "Why did you never come back?" hung in the air of the silent room. A simple question that carried the weight of a lifetime of pain. Ethan looked at her face, illuminated by the soft lamplight, and saw the lines of tiredness and resentment that he himself had drawn there. There was nowhere left to run. The truth, however ugly, was the only bridge he could try to build over the abyss that separated them. He took a deep breath. The air seemed heavy, dense with memories. "Because I was a coward, Sophia," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper. "That's the only answer. All the others are just excuses." He stood up and began to pace the room, as if movement could help the words come out. "When I left here, I was a hungry young man, not just for food, but for everything. For success, for respect, for a chance to prove I was somebody. And New York City, it's a monster that feeds on that hunger. I dove in head first. I studied by day, worked by night, slept 3 hours a night, and at first everything I did was for us. Every small victory, every good grade, every compliment from a boss. I thought, I'm closer to being able to come back for Sophia." He stopped, looking out the window at the darkness outside. But little by little, the monster began to devour me. Success is a drug, Sophia, and it's a very potent one. Every new step, every new contract, demanded more from me, and I gave it. I gave my time, my energy, my soul. Your letters at first were my beacon. I read them over and over, and they gave me strength. But then they began to become a reminder of my failure. Each letter was a demand for the promise I was breaking, and I, in my cowardice, began to fear them. And then I stopped answering them. I told myself it was to protect you, to free you, so you could move on with your life. But it was a lie. It was to free myself from my own guilt. He turned to her, his eyes filled with ancient shame. And then I met Eleanor, my late wife. She was like me, ambitious, focused, relentless. We didn't have a love like ours, that love that seems like it's going to set the world on fire. Ours was a partnership, a fusion of ambitions. Building the tech future empire became my reason for living, because it was easier to focus on spreadsheets and stocks than on the hole I had in my chest, the hole that had your name. He sat down again, his body heavy with exhaustion. I never forgot you, Sophia, not for a single day. You became my personal ghost. In every meeting, in every luxury dinner, in every conquest, there was a voice in my head whispering, and Sophia, what would she think of this? I became the man I am today, running from the young man I was when I loved you. And the truth is, that young man was a much better man than I will ever be. I didn't come back because I was ashamed of having broken my promise, ashamed of the man I had become. And that shame was greater than my love. I was a coward, and there isn't a day I don't pay the price for it. The brutal, honest confession floated between them. Sophia listened, her face impassive, but her eyes registered every word. For the first time, she didn't see the millionaire or the traitor. She saw only Julian, the young man who had lost his way. Her anger, which had been her shield for so long, began to dissolve, giving way to a deep sadness. A sadness for both of them, for the life they could have had, for the mistakes that led them to that hospital room. She didn't say, "I forgive you." It was too soon for that, but she said something that meant even more to Ethan. "You need some sleep, Julian. You're exhausted." It was a small gesture of care, the first bridge and over the abyss. The peace, however, was short-lived. The crisis they thought they had overcome was just regrouping for a more violent attack. 2 days later, Lily's fever returned, stronger, closer. The child, previously drowsy, was now agitated. Her breathing was rapid and shallow. The family doctor, a renowned pediatrician Ethan had brought to the mansion, examined her with growing concern. "It's not a simple virus," he told Ethan and Sophia. "The fever isn't responding to antipyretics. The lung auscultation is worrying. I fear it's bacterial pneumonia, and given her condition, it's probably already at an advanced stage. She needs to be hospitalized immediately." Fear returned, chilling and paralyzing. The word hospitalized resonated in Sophia's mind, bringing back ghosts of public hospitals, waiting lines, lack of resources. "She'll have the best room, the best care," Ethan said, trying to reassure her. But his own voice was laden with panic. In less than an hour, they were in the presidential suite of the country's best children's hospital. The environment was luxurious, more like a five-star hotel than a hospital. But the medical paraphernalia, the monitors, the IV lines, the constant beeping, were a constant reminder of the seriousness of the situation. Lily was immediately put on strong antibiotic medication, but her small body struggled. The fever fluctuated. Her breathing remained difficult. Ethan and Sophia did not leave her side. They became a team, a pair of parents united by fear. He handled all the logistics, spoke with the doctors, ensured nothing was lacking. She took care of the essentials, holding Lily's hot little hand, singing the lullabies that calmed her, wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. In the long silences of the hospital dawn, they talked. Sophia told stories about Lily's childhood, the first time she walked, her stubbornness about eating broccoli, the way she hugged tightly when she was scared. And Ethan listened, absorbing every detail of the life he had lost, his heart aching with love and regret. He, in turn, told her about his own childhood dreams, about the father he had lost early, about how he and Sophia were two halves of the same soul. The past and present began to intertwine, no longer as sources of pain, but as the threads of a complex tapestry that was their story. The main crisis arrived on the third night. One of the monitors began to beep shrilly. Lily's oxygen saturation was dangerously dropping. A team of doctors and nurses invaded the room. "We need to take her to the ICU now," the chief doctor shouted. "Her left lung is collapsing. The infection is more aggressive than we thought." They were pushed out of the room, into the cold hallway, as Lily's small bed was rushed away. The ICU door closed in front of them, separating them from their daughter. What followed were hours of indescribable torture. The ICU waiting room was a purgatory. Every minute was an eternity. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say. They just sat, side by side, united in their silent desperation. The helplessness was total. All of Ethan's money, all his power, was useless in the face of the fragility of his daughter's life. It was Sophia who broke. The control she had maintained for so many years, the strength that had made her survive everything, finally gave way. She began to cry, a convulsive, silent cry, her shoulders shaking. "It's my fault," she sobbed. "I should have brought her sooner. I didn't have money for doctors. I left her like this. It's my fault." Ethan, seeing her pain, felt his own pain transform into a fierce need to protect her. He hugged her, not a clumsy hug like before, but a strong, desperate embrace. He pulled her close, letting her cry on his shoulder. "It's not your fault, Sophia," he whispered into her hair, using the old nickname for the first time since their reunion. "It's not your fault. You kept her alive. You were her hero. The fault is mine for not having been there, for not having taken care of you both. I can't lose her, Ethan," she cried. "She's all I have. She's the only good thing I've done in my life." "We're not going to lose her," he said, his voice firm, trying to convey a conviction he didn't feel himself. "She's strong, like her mother." In that embrace, amidst the smell of hospital and the fear of death, the last defenses between them fell. They were no longer Ethan and Sophia, the millionaire and the ex-girlfriend. They were Julian and Sophie. They were a terrified father and mother, clinging to each other like two shipwrecked people in the middle of a storm. Their alliance was sealed at that moment, not by a contract or by a confession, but by the shared fear of the most unbearable loss of all. The doctor finally appeared at the door, his face tired, his coat wrinkled. They separated, holding their breath. "We made it," the doctor said, his voice exhausted, but with a trace of relief. "It was a battle. The infection was very severe. We had to perform a drainage procedure on the lung, but she responded. She's a very strong girl. Her saturation is rising. The worst is over. She'll be fine." The wave of relief was so violent that it almost knocked them down. Sophia fell to her knees, her hands on her face, crying, this time with gratitude. Ethan leaned against the wall, his legs trembling, feeling as if he had aged 10 years in those last hours. When they finally entered the ICU, they saw Lily in an incubator, surrounded by tubes and monitors, but breathing calmly. Her small chest rose and fell at a steady rhythm. She was alive. They stood there, hand in hand, looking at their daughter. The outside world, with its mansions, its companies, its hostile butlers, had disappeared. The only universe that mattered was contained in that small glass space. The crisis had pushed them to the limit of what was bearable, but in the process, it had burned the bridges of resentment and pride. They had entered that hospital as two people broken by the past. They left as a family, forged in the fire of fear and united by the promise of a future. The journey to heal the wounds would be long, but for the first time, they were walking together. What do you think was the most significant turning point in Ethan and Sophia's relationship, and why? Lily's discharge from the hospital 2 weeks later was not the end of a trial, but the true first day of the rest of their lives. The child returned to the mansion not as a guest, but as the princess of a kingdom that was now hers. The illness had left her body fragile, and recovery was a slow process that demanded patience and infinite care. And it was in that care that their newly born family learned to breathe in unison. Ethan immersed himself in fatherhood with the same obsessive intensity he once dedicated to business. He canceled all his trips, delegated 90% of his responsibilities at Tech Future Inc., and transformed the mansion into a recovery center for his daughter. He learned to take her temperature, to give her medication at the right time, to prepare the fruit purees the nutritionist had recommended. Nights that were once filled with reports and emails were now dedicated to reading stories to Lily until she fell asleep. He read about enchanted worlds, about dragons and fairies, and in each story, he tried to rewrite his own, trying to be the hero he had never been. Sophia, at first, observed this transformation with cautious distrust. It was difficult for her, who had been her daughter's sole protective wall for 8 years, to suddenly share that role. But it was impossible to deny the authenticity of Ethan's effort. She heard him wake up in the middle of the night to check Lily's breathing. She saw the frustration in his eyes when the child refused to eat, and she saw the pure joy on his face when Lily finally laughed at one of his silly faces. Little by little, she began to lower her guard, to allow him to be a father, to allow them to be parents together. They became a team. They spent hours talking about Lily's small progress, about their fears and hopes. The conversations were no longer about the past that would be, but about the future they were trying to build for their daughter. The abyss between them was slowly being filled by small bridges of trust and shared purpose. However, the old order of the house still struggled to survive, embodied in the figure of Arthur. The butler saw the new family dynamic as disorder, a breach of protocol that insulted the memory of his former mistress, Eleanor. He kept the house impeccable, but his discontent was a cold presence, a constant reminder that Sophia and Lily were, to him, intruders. The final confrontation occurred one rainy afternoon. Sophia was in the kitchen preparing a snack for Lily. When Arthur entered, he ignored her completely and began to give orders to one of the employees. Make sure the dining room windows are polished with the imported product. Mrs. Eleanor was very specific about that. She had standards that this house seems to be forgetting. The insinuation was direct, intentional. Sophia felt her blood boil, but before she could respond, Ethan's voice sounded from the doorway. "Arthur," he said, his voice calm, but with a weight of authority the butler hadn't heard in a long time. "Come to my office now." In the library, Ethan didn't shout. He was surgical. "Arthur, I owe you a lot. You took care of this house, of me, and of Eleanor's memory, with impeccable loyalty for many years, and for that, I will be eternally grateful." He paused, looking into the older man's eyes. "But that phase of my life is over. Mrs. Eleanor is gone, and this house has a new mistress and a young heiress. Their names are Sophia and Lily. They are my family, the future of this house, and your attitude towards them has been unacceptable." Arthur tried to defend himself. "Sir, I was just trying to maintain standards. The memory of Eleanor's memory will always be honored," Ethan interrupted, "but it will not be used as a weapon to hurt my present family. I understand that this change is difficult for you. That's why I'm giving you an option. You can stay, accept the new reality, and treat Sophia and Lily with the respect and deference they deserve as my wife and my daughter. Or," he pushed an envelope across the table, "you can accept this severance package. It is extremely generous. Enough for you to retire comfortably anywhere in the world you choose. The decision is yours, but it must be made now." Arthur looked at the envelope, then at his employer's face, and saw that the hesitant man he had served in recent years had disappeared. In his place was a king protecting his kingdom. The butler, a man of the past, a man of order and old loyalties, understood that his time there was over. Arthur took the envelope. "It was an honor to serve your family, Mr. Ethan. I wish you happiness." And with a final bow, he withdrew. The last anchor that tied Ethan to his old life had been cut. With Arthur's departure, the mansion finally began to transform into a home. The rigid rules relaxed. The sound of Lily's laughter echoed through the halls. Sophia, feeling more secure, began to flourish. Ethan, seeing that she spent hours drawing in a notebook with Lily, set up a small studio for her in one of the guest rooms, with canvases, paints, and everything she needed. Sophia, who had abandoned her artistic talent to survive, rediscovered her passion. She painted. She painted landscapes of her childhood, the river, the sun, and she painted portraits of Lily. And little by little, she began to paint Ethan, not the millionaire, but the man who read stories to his daughter, the father who pushed the swing in the garden. Her paintings were a chronicle of their healing, of the reconstruction of their family. Months turned into a year. Lily was completely recovered, a healthy and vibrant child. Ethan and Sophia's relationship had deepened, transformed from a youthful romance into a mature partnership based on respect and a rediscovered, stronger love. One spring afternoon, on the 3rd anniversary of the day she had knocked on his door, Ethan took her for a walk in the garden. The place was covered in flowers. He led her to a stone bench under a blooming jacaranda tree. "A year ago," he began, holding her hands, "you came to my house asking for a job, and instead, you gave me a life. You and Lily brought me back from the world of the dead. You taught me to feel again." He knelt in front of her, a gesture that mirrored her plea at his door, but which was now laden with a completely different meaning. He took a small box from his pocket. Inside was not an ostentatious diamond, but a simple platinum ring with a single, small sapphire, the color of her eyes. "Sophia, I spent 12 years building an empire on the foundation of a broken promise. Now, I want to spend the rest of my life building a home on the foundation of a new promise. I don't want to be just your daughter's father. I want to be your partner, your friend, your husband. I want to wake up next to you every day, face the storms, and celebrate the sunny days. I love you, Sophia, more than I loved the young man who left you behind. Because now I know your worth and I know mine. Marry me. Allow me to finally fulfill the promise I made so long ago. Sophia, her eyes filled with tears of happiness, did not hesitate. Yes, she whispered, nodding. 1,000 times yes! He slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that garden, the cycle of pain closed, giving way to a circle of love. The final scene takes place 2 years later. It is Lily's 11th birthday. The mansion's garden is unrecognizable. It is no longer a formal, silent space. It is filled with colorful balloons, children's music, dozens of children running and shouting. It's a real birthday party, noisy, chaotic, and full of life. Ethan and Sophia watch the scene from the terrace, holding hands. He is not wearing a suit. She is not wearing jewelry. They are just a father and a mother, looking at their daughter, who runs happily and healthily among her friends. The house is no longer a mausoleum. It is a home. Lily runs towards them, her face smeared with chocolate cake, a radiant smile. "Daddy and Mommy, come play!" She hugs them, a tight embrace that unites them. Ethan lifts her into his arms, kissing her face. Sophia adjusts a lock of hair from her daughter's forehead. In that triple embrace is the image of complete happiness, a conquered, deserved happiness. One of Lily's little friends, running, trips and spills a glass of juice near Ethan. The liquid stains his pants. The child gets scared. "Sorry, Uncle," he stammers. Ethan just laughs, sets Lily down, and kneels in front of the child. "Don't worry, champ. It's just juice." Stains come out. The important thing is to keep playing. He looks at Sophia over the child's shoulder, and they share a smile that contains the memory of other stains, of other accidents, of a past that almost destroyed them, but that ultimately united them forever. The transformation was complete. The man who had closed himself off from the world due to loss now opened his arms to life, grateful for every small, messy stain of happiness. Lesson learned. This story teaches us that true redemption comes not from erasing the past, but from confronting it with honesty and courage. It shows that love, forgiveness, and the willingness to rebuild can transform even the deepest pain into a foundation for a beautiful and meaningful life. Even when we make grave mistakes, the opportunity to make amends and choose a path of genuine connection can lead to profound happiness and a sense of belonging. What are your thoughts on this rewritten version? Do you have any other stories you'd like me to work on? Subscribe to my channel. Like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments below.